Welcome, everyone. My name is Jacob. Thank you for joining me. This is Hunt Detail, and hope your preseason or your hunting season is going well. Depends on what state you live in, or if you're doing some travel hunting or what have you. But it's that time of year, very exciting. And I got a chance to go out this past weekend for a sit for a couple hours. This was Big Woods Public Land. I was out of state, and it's an area that I've hunted before early season and had encounters, and it's not anywhere near ag. And it's a creek system. There's an oxbow. I've mentioned before, creek systems have a lot of diversity of browse, and this also butts up against some white oaks. And unfortunately, didn't have any encounters, and is what it is. I'm had wanted to pull some trail cams and unfortunately wasn't able to do that either. It just a little bit rushed and it just didn't fit. But it was nice to get out. It was nice to sort of test my gear, sort of in how quickly can I do this? How quietly can I do this? It'd been obviously 6 months or whatever, 8 months since I had climbed up a tree with my saddle gear and whatnot. But it was really nice, and hope to get out a bunch this week and start almost really doing some observation sits and just to really get a sense of what's going on, where a mature buck might be from a feeding standpoint or a bedding standpoint, and in some of these different areas that I hunt. Obviously, things aren't going to really be heating up until another 4 weeks from now, but I have some hunting dreams that I want to accomplish, and I will talk about that later in the podcast. But also want to talk a little bit about some content that's out there. It's not mine. It's getting a lot of attention, and we'll touch on that. Before we get to all of that, I have to touch on what happened in Utah last week, and the death and assassination of Charlie Kirk. And obviously, this is not a podcast that's connected to politics or to any of news or anything like that. This is obviously hunting related, but I had such high respect for this young man and so impressed by his passion and the fact that he would take time to engage young people and challenge them on their thinking, on things that they believed or thought they believed, and he would share his perspective and his views on a particular topic. And it's just, I mean, it's a terrible loss for our country. He was truly a great young man, and if you ever watched him, he was always very respectful, very accommodating, very open, and just somebody that a lot of young men could look up to in terms of what it means to be a young man in this country. And he was 31 and he had wisdom beyond his years. And one of the things that really struck a chord with me and I want to share with you all is he was on stage, he was talking about marriage and men wearing what they wear both during a wedding and a funeral, and why he felt it was the same. You have the woman that's dressed in a white gown usually, and she's the icon, she's ascendant, and yet the man is just wearing a suit, and it's the same thing he wears to a funeral. And to him, he said that becoming a husband is a death to oneself. That the boyish behaviors of going out to the bars, flirting with other women, the wandering eye, playing video games till 1 a.m. He listed a whole bunch of boyish behaviors that died as you move into manhood and really serving your wife and serving your future family. And I thought that was so great. And I think there's so many young men around in this country that need to hear that message. And I honestly don't think it even applies to just getting married. I think it applies to as you get older, you do need to prune things out of your life. You need to assign your identity to something that's eternal. And I'm a follower of Christ. And I try to assign my identity to Christ. It's not assigned to my job or to this podcast or anything hunting related. It's not even assigned to necessarily my family. I serve my family for sure, but my identity needs to be tied to something eternal, and that's through Christ. And I really like Charlie's message, and I like what he had to say, because it's I think it's, again, something that a lot of young men need to hear as they get into their early 20s and understand that certain things need to just be pruned out of your life as you transition from a boy to a man. Um, so I encourage you to listen to some of his clips, some of his conversations. Check out Turning Point USA, follow them, donate. Uh, the message he had needs to continue. It's something that everyone needs to hear, and I'm still shaken and still disappointed and sad about what happened. But uh, obviously, things move forward. We move forward, but I do want to encourage you to check out his work and have it challenge maybe some of the things that you've thought about, or maybe you don't believe in or believe in, because he really is incredibly sharp and was an incredibly smart young man. So, with that, I'm going to pivot to some content that's you may have come across. Different person, different young man by the name of, I think it's Derrick Dixon, and he has a YouTube called Whitetail Research, and his YouTube channel and his videos have blown up. And what he did was, over the course of last hunting season, and I think it was 9 months, is what he said, is where he dedicated full time to observing mature whitetails with a thermal drone that he has. And he used this on a couple different private properties that he has access to. It wasn't public land, but he spent in the neighborhood of 21,000 hours, I think is what he said, observing mature whitetail bucks and their movement. And I've fascinated by it. I think it's great. I think it's really enlightening. I think it'll be really interesting to see if he's able to sort of observe whitetail bucks in situations where they're pressured, where they're bumped. Maybe how how a buck handles lockdown, if he's locked down on a doe, and um, you know terrain features that they sort of use in that capacity. I think it'll be really interesting, and I want to encourage you to go to his channel, watch some of his videos. I would also want to encourage you to maybe find a podcast. But what I wanted, because he's been on a couple of them, what I wanted to talk about today was some of the outcomes of that research. And obviously, you can watch it for yourself, but these are some things. There were really two things that really jumped out of what his initial video. And one of the things was morning movement of whitetails that he observed was of a straight line. He said it was missional in the standpoint that the mature bucks they're getting up and they're moving with intent. And he said that they tend to cover this a similar amount of territory in the afternoon, but it's more wandering, or it's more there was a different approach to their movement in the evening, and he felt like there was less regard for morning movement in terms of maybe wind, maybe even thermals, that they had something in mind that they wanted to get to. And I think that that's really an interesting insight. And as I think about my hunts, I can't say if that's accurate or not, because a lot of the deer that I've killed are, so it's some function of the rut. I mean, I can think of some times where, um, like the buck I killed last year out of state with my bow, he was he was moving in a missional capacity. A group of does had gone up a ridge, and then I had another group of does that were underneath me at the time that he was moving up that same ridge. But regardless, think about it as it relates to your previous hunts, and I think he's got makes some good points, and maybe those morning hunts may be a little bit more important than maybe an afternoon hunt. Uh, he also talks a lot about um, how the terrain sets and how you could or could not get an opportunity at a certain buck because it's almost unbeatable based on wind and thermals. When he observed a particular buck, the wind and the thermals never really presented much of an opportunity for a hunter to be in a position to get a shot. And I think that that's enlightening as well, because there may be times where you are hunting a particular buck and there's just, unfortunately, the setup just isn't going to work in your favor based on predominant wind and thermals. The other piece that he talked about was what the thermal switch, and you may have heard about this more recently. So thermals, um, a thermal is just hot, air that has been warmed up, let's say a column of air that's been warmed up by the sun and is, or just warmed up in particular, and it moves up it moves up, and that could be up a ridge, it could be up a hill, it could be up a mountain, but it's an amount of air that has been warmed, and it's moving from an area that's cooler to an area that is, I would assume, of a similar temperature. And the same can be said in a way where as air cools, it's falling. Now it's not necessarily a thermal, but you have air that falls as it cools off. So if you think about it's nighttime, you have air that's cool, that's coming off a ridge system and dropping to the bottom. And then let's say as the air warms at 10:30, 10, 11, depending on where the sun is in relation to that terrain, it's warming up that column of air, and that is, of course, going to rise up a ridge or up that same system. And then in the evening, as the sun starts to set, the air starts to cool at different areas. That air is going to again fall as the sun has set or gone uh, behind the trees or even behind another ridge system, behind a mountain. And if you spend any time out west hunting, thermals are sort of what you live and die on. Obviously, here in the east, we don't have mountains per se. We have large hills or hill systems, and predominant wind can become a greater factor than, say, if you're in a basin between several mountains. You may have predominant wind at play on some level, but you've got thermals probably playing a much larger role, because if the wind is coming from a certain area, that mountain system may be blocking or redirecting that predominant wind. And so what he was saying here is that when there was a thermal shift, and this is, he noted like at 4 o'clock, I think the sun had set or something of that nature. And I'm assuming that this is later in the season when the days are much shorter. At 4 o'clock, if the sun is setting, he noticed that I believe it was 3 different mature bucks got up and started moving because, and as a function of those thermals shifting, those thermals would be falling. And I think they started moving towards food. This was a food plot, and this was again private ground that they started moving towards. But I think it's definitely something to think about as we're out, as we start to get out in the field in the coming weeks and months. Is when is the sun setting or when is the sun rising? I traditionally hunt low in the mornings because of falling thermals. And then rising thermals, I might set up maybe halfway up a ridge or at the near the top of a ridge. I'm never really sitting at the very tip top of a ridge. But I but my setups are also based on predominant wind. They're also based on what ways that I can have my scent not be part of the equation. If there's a bluff, of course, it would be great to be up against the bluff where my scent is falling off that bluff. But it also is predicated on, is there sign there? Do I believe that this is a high traffic area for a mature whitetail? And so there's a lot of other variables there that come into play, but my setups are definitely based on wind. Definitely, thermals are accounted for, but also I'm trying to use terrain in a way that helps me get rid of both, to keep both out of the equation. And I think obviously a lot of us do that, but from a one of the things that he did say, he felt like mature bucks were using or more reliant on thermals than they were predominant wind, because there were some situations where predominant wind was blowing into the face of a particular buck, and whereas the common thought is that that buck would not be using having the wind in their face. They might be having it go over their back, as they might use thermals rising up to them in their face, and that really kind of creates that thermal hub. Now, the definition of a thermal hub can be a lot of things. I think in some cases, folks will look at ridges as their points come together, create sort of a bowl, and they call that a thermal hub. And that's so you have, if you think of those points and those ridges, those ridge edges sort of meeting at different areas and creating a little bowl of sorts, it's obviously a very efficient area for a buck to travel through because they can catch thermals falling off those ridges and maybe catch the scent of a lot of different does as they search for a hot doe. And that's a definition of a thermal hub. Um, but that would really apply a lot in, say, the morning, or in a late evening hunt where the sun has set, you have temperatures dropping and air columns of air falling. But I would say in an afternoon hunt, that might not necessarily be an ideal hub. I also think of a thermal hub as an area where thermals are rising and it's hitting the predominant wind near the top of, let's say, a ridge system. So let's say you have a south-facing slope and the sun, or maybe a north. Well, it could be any facing slope, but as that sun is warming the air, you have that rising thermal, and then if you have a predominant wind coming out of a different direction, it's going to hit, and that could be an ideal area for, I would say, a buck to bed, depending on the terrain and the cover, but also an area for a buck to cruise. So they're trying to cover ground and trying to find hot does, so they're trying to cover thermal hubs. And so you'll hear that terminology thrown out a lot. And I think, again, the thermal hub can mean a lot of things. And in the field, there's no exact science. It's how shaded is that area? Is there another ridge that prevents the sun from really hitting that ground? Is there a lake or a pond or something? Because that will impact thermals as well, as that water heats up or as that water cools down. And I'm not going to get into those things, but those are all things to consider. I use milkweed a lot as I'm going through to just check that what that wind is doing, of course, and what the thermals are doing, and where is my scent going. And I think that has been incredibly helpful for me because it obviously helps you identify a kill tree and identify a solid setup. So for me, in terms pivoting off this topic, in terms of my hunt dreams for 2026, I have roughly 5 different tags uh, this season. Now, do I expect to fill all 5 of those? I mean, I'm going to say all 5 of these are buck tags. Am I going to fill all 5 of those? I think it's going to be difficult, and part of it is just time, the amount of time in the field. Now, I hope to try to fill a tag in the month of September, and I've got 2 weeks left in September, so I better get on that. I head out west in early October, and that's a mule deer tag, and that's archery, and it's going to be a tall order. I mean, it's not a slam dunk, and by any stretch of the imagination, and I am excited about that, but also nervous because I really do want to fill that tag. The back half of October is when things really start to heat up. Obviously, November and December, early December is ideal. And, these tags, I mean, all of them, I've got 3 archery tags and 1 archery/gun tag, and then 1 pure gun tag. And so what's interesting is I've filled, last year I filled a tag using a muzzleloader and a bow, and then I killed another buck with a bow, but I did not recover him. But yeah, it's all deer this year. In previous years, it's been some combination of elk and whitetail or whatever, but it's all deer, whitetail, and mule deer. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself. Unfortunately, I look at the calendar and it scares me at how quick this is all going to go. And so I think it's important, if you can get out early October or late September, to do so, because you're going to hear things like, the October lull, and you're going to hear other things about it's too hot, or it's just not moving or whatever. And you're going to hear all that. But again, the season goes really, really fast. I mean, late October through, Thanksgiving will go in a blink of an eye. You'll have so many things that you have to take care of from a family, from a husband standpoint. And obviously we all want to have a balanced approach to the hunting season, and as it relates to our families. So make sure that you're planning that time, you're communicating what you need to do or what you want to do, and get out there, have fun, enjoy it, and appreciate your all support. Use the code DETAIL at Redmond Salt Life, redmond.salt.com. I believe that's the website. Go to Raw Rev Bars, use the code there, DETAIL, save 20% on the Raw Rev Bars. They're delicious, or save 15% on the Relight electrolyte mix at redmond.life.com. Yeah, that's the website. Give me a 5 stars on iTunes. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week. We'll talk again next week.